And we're live.
Hello and welcome to On the Same Page, a podcast in which two mates separated by oceans and hemispheres talk about books and catch each other up on life between the lines. Unfortunately, we can't get together in person, but through this podcast we hope to get on the same page.
Welcome to On the Same Page episode, classics that are worth it, classics that aren't. I'm joined, as always, by my trusty co-host, Seamus.
Hello.
How are you today, Shame?
Very well.
Shame. And enjoying a nice Cab Merlot by the looks of it.
Absolutely.
I can tell that's how good my wine nose is. I can get the hints of
Smell it
Merlot
across
from
the ocean.
16,000 kilometers away.
Yep. How are you doing?
Very nice notes of leather, I believe.
Always.
Always in the Cabernet. My little Margaret River drop, perhaps, or a Coonawarra. I am not sure. I'm enjoying nice coffee. It is the morning here in Berlin, or actually it's the afternoon now, and it is the evening there for you in Sydney.
Yes, it is.
And today we are talking about classic books that are, we think, worth the time and energy, and some which are overrated or a bit engorged in their reputation.
Yep.
So, Seamus, how about you kick us off?
Yep. Well, I tried to pick, so I've picked three books. I picked one classic from the 19th century, one from the 20th, and then one from the 21st century.
You are organized,
so I want to sort of spread it out a bit. And the 21st century is one that I hope becomes a literary classic, if it's not already considered a literary classic. But number one, 19th century, was The Count of Monte Cristo.
Oh, okay.
I couldn't go past it. Could not go past it. I don't even know where to begin with this book. It is brilliant. I don't know what I expected when I first picked it up, but it wasn't what I got, and what I got was perfection. It's a story that takes place, it's France, Italy, the Mediterranean, all over Europe. It follows Edmond Dantes, who's wrongfully imprisoned, and then while he's in prison, amasses a great fortune. And then when he gets out of prison, he seeks revenge as Monte Cristo on those who put him in prison. So it spans many years. I think it spans about 30 years. It's just a perfect adventure quest, revenge tale, love story. It's just got everything. Alexandre Dumas wrote it. He serialized it, released it over, I think it was about 6 months, as all books were serialized back then. And I know you haven't read it, and I know we've spoken about it many times because I absolutely love it.
Yeah. I mean, I want to read it. I will read it. And I think that's something which we'll probably both be saying a lot in our podcast lives.
Probably,
I will read that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I shall overcome that
Yeah.
1,400 pages.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a big book, 1,400. Let me see.
That Everest of an adventure novel.
1,300 pages, my copy.
Look at that thing. I mean, I'm just looking at Seamus carry that. Wow. I mean, you've saved yourself money on a home gym with that. I can tell.
It's a couple of kilos.
That's a brick. That is an absolute brick.
And it's brilliant as well.
Wow. I mean, well worth it. Looks
Yeah.
like lovely. Is that the Penguin edition? What have we got there?
Yeah, Penguin Classics, hardcover,
Gorgeous.
21st
Gorgeous.
present.
Oh, wow. It's a good present. Someone gave you a lot of time with that. I don't think I've ever had a present which I've spent that much time with, 1,400 pages with.
Yeah, I downloaded the audiobook of it as well. I think it's about 50 hours.
I did consider that. That for 50 hours. I was like,
yeah.
I hope it's a good narration, but maybe that's the way I'll digest it. I do like an audiobook.
It's very good. And I know I believe it was Alexander's father or his grandfather actually had a similar kind of story in that he was a rank of general in the during
French
the
Navy, wasn't
First French Republic. It might have been the Navy.
he? One of
perhaps.
Napoleon's men, I thought.
Yeah, and then so he was famous and he fights under Napoleon. But as he was black, he was dismissed from the army later when the empire reestablished slavery, and he
Bastards.
sort of just withered away very quickly and died. And so Alexander Dumas would have been raised on this story of his father being wronged for no real reason other than his skin color. And that would have then perhaps, I mean, it's all kind of speculative, but perhaps given the seedlings to a story about revenge.
Right. And yes, okay. I didn't even know it was a great revenge story. So that's marvelous. But yeah.
Yeah.
Liberté, égalité, fraternité. Pas vrai. Not the case under old Boney M. God, yeah, no, it sounds masterful, and maybe that's actually the kind of book I'm in the mood for. But I did just my first choice is a book I just read, and it is not that long.
Fair
It's
enough.
not exactly a short one, but it's
Mm.
not that long, and that is Orlando by Virginia Woolf, 1928. It is an amazing book. It's incredibly, I guess, obviously modernistic. Virginia Woolf, it's the late 20s, but it's a lot of the magic realism involved. More or less tells the story of starting from the reign of Elizabeth I in the late 16th century, and traces this young nobleman, English nobleman, Orlando, for more or less 300 years, to the point Virginia actually finishes the novel on the novel finishes on the date of its publication in
Oh, fun.
1928. So she's done a nice little very good self publicist in old Virginia.
Yeah.
And
Like J.K. Rowling does something similar as well.
does she?
Yeah. She released The Philosopher's Stone in 1999, I think it was. And then in the timeline for Harry Potter, the final battle takes place in 1999. And so that's the whole point of the I open at the close, which is I think that's only revealed in the last book, but when he kisses the golden snitch, it says I open at the close, which relates to it opens up when he dies. But it's also a double little thing because she finishes the books when she started them.
Right. It's amazing maybe to think that after all of that, J.K. Rowling was just like a Y2K conspiracist. So that everything ends at the end of 1999. This was all Harry. This is all a joke. Y2K. It's real. We're no longer here. This is a simulation now, but we used to be. Well, yeah. I mean, a lot of if Virginia was alive, she'd probably write something like that. And more or less that it follows this young nobleman. He becomes favored by the late Elizabeth, and she gives him lands and titles and all these other things, and then he eventually becomes a emissary or a diplomat in then Constantinople under James I. And while he's there at about age 30, and the whole thing more or less is a metaphor for writing, really. The book in a big way. It's this for he's writing this poem called The Oak Tree, the whole book, and the story is more or less a metaphor for writing a book, for getting some big thing out of you. And while he's in Istanbul, then Constantinople, there's a kind of a Turk uprising against the Sultan, and in the midst of this, at about age 30, Orlando becomes a woman. You don't really know how it happens. He's asleep, right, and then he kind of wakes up and he's kind of a woman. Virginia doesn't really explain it. Pronouns change, and then lives for another 300 years into the point at which the novel finishes, 1928. And it kind of courses through the history of English literature. She kind of has an affair with Pope, and she's friends with Donne, and and so she's kind of, Orlando's kind of there, the eternal poet, and there's also this critic and there's other characters who lived for hundreds of years as well as this poet called Nicholas Green, who's like a critic. And so you kind of think that at the beginning of the novel, she kind of shows this critic the oak tree, and he pans it and then makes fun of him then in like the public press. And then, you know, she kind of reworks this poem for the next 300 years, and then she runs into him again in the 20s in the street, and he also is still alive, and you don't know why. You don't ask questions.
Fair.
And reads it again, and now he loves it. Now it's the best thing ever. And he's the eternal critic. 300 years ago, he was saying that all Elizabethan literature was shit, and then 300 years later, he's saying, "Oh, all modern is shit," and you know, if only we could go back and have the Elizabethans again. So he's just kind of the eternal critic, and it's great like that. And you know, it also more or less kind of is a vessel for Virginia's love of Vita Sackville West, another great writer. I mean, probably a more famous writer than Virginia Woolf at the time, and definitely probably a more financially successful writer than Virginia Woolf at the time. And she was from a very noble family and was not able to inherit her family's estate because she was a woman. And just got like some husband, and that, you know, that's got to do with it when Orlando comes back from Constantinople, and they're like, "Oh, we thought you were dead, or whatever. We haven't seen you for years," because she lives among the Romani in like Turkey for a while as like a nomad. And then she comes back, and they're like, "Well, we have to do this whole legal case because we thought you were dead, and now you're a woman. Can you have your old estates back?" and all this kind of stuff. And so obviously, you know, there's lots of social commentary on women's rights in that sense, and what women can have, finances, votes, rights, things like that. And then there's, you know, in the years since its publication, obviously Orlando's been a big book in gender studies and feminism, and now in terms of like trans literature and things like that, people think about it. Not to say not to say it's a trans novel, which it's not really. As I said, you know, it's really more of a book about writing. But I loved it, and it's really fun. And maybe I'll just read a quick little quote from it.
Yeah, please.
Nature, who has played so many queer tricks upon us, making us so unequally of clay and diamonds, of rainbow and granite, and stuffed them into a case, often of the most incongruous, for the poet has a butcher's face and the butcher a poet's. Nature, who delights in muddle and mystery, so that even now, the 1st of November, 1927, we know not why we go upstairs or why we come down again. Our most daily movements are like the passage of a ship on an unknown sea, and the sailors at the masthead ask, pointing their glasses to the horizon, "Is there land or is there none?" To which, if we are prophets, we make an answer, yes. If we are truthful, we say, no. Nature, who has so much to answer for besides the perhaps unwieldy length of this sentence, has further complicated her task and added to our confusion by providing not only a perfect rag bag of odds and ends within us, a piece of a policeman's trousers lying cheek by jowl with Queen Alexandra's wedding veil, but has contrived to the whole assortment shall be lightly stitched together by a single thread. Memory is the seamstress, and a capricious one at that. Kind of goes on like that. But yeah, marvelous book. Really loved it. And I haven't read much of Virginia Woolf. I'd given it kind of a few attempts at Miss Dalloway, but it's quite a sad book, and it didn't really catch me, but I'm a bit more interested to read it now.
Yeah, I loved Mrs. Dalloway. Yeah. We had to read Mrs. Dalloway for one of my uni classes. Might have been a modernism class. But yeah, I loved it. I actually listened to it on an audiobook. Oh, yeah. And it was just so easy to listen to, but so easy to get lost in and also not pay attention to, sort of drift out, because you follow her train of thoughts, and then you sort of like get caught looking out the window yourself, and you're caught up in this like poetic language, and then like all of a sudden 10 pages has gone past and you don't know what's going on. Right. But yeah, I loved Mrs. Dalloway. I loved the narration of it, the story of it.
That was definitely a bit of my vibe, maybe why I didn't get through the whole thing. And the same with The Waves, which is another one of a kind of more stream of consciousness books. Both are great, but I think why, and Virginia Woolf's essays are amazing, and I've read quite a few of those. She's such a strong voice. But I think why I loved Orlando so much is this kind of like great historical magical fiction and told really powerfully, and her voice is so strong and her narrative powers are so strong that, I heard some criticisms, people saying, it's plotless, it's stupid. Like, how can this guy just be alive? How can no one care that she's this? All that. Like, I don't know why anyone would possibly care. It's like, coming into Harry Potter and being like, how can magic be real? I don't know. Like, if you can't suspend your disbelief.
Metamorphosis, like, why did he turn into a bug?
Exactly. And Metamorphosis is probably the most, that's exactly what I was thinking. It's Ovidian. It's Ovid, it's Metamorphosis, it's Kafka. You really don't need to ask questions. You just have to accept the terms that Virginia gives you and then let her take you. And it's really wonderful. Yeah. Really loved it.
Nice.
Okay. On to you. Number two,
I picked a book called Perfume. By a German writer, Perfume by Patrick Suskind.
I have a copy of this. I haven't not read it.
I do? Well, get ready to want to read it because I'm going to try convince you.
Okay.
It's called Perfume, the Story of a Murderer. So the answer's sort of in the title about what it's about. It follows this character, Grenouille. He's French, so my pronunciation might be a tad off. But he's abandoned as a child because his mother is disgusted by him, and it's sort of a bit ambiguous as to what's going on. But as he grows up, this is all within like the first sort of chapter as well. It turns out he's got an incredible sense of smell, like a Sherlockian sense of smell, in that he can separate and collate smells together, which sounds very, very odd. And it's at a time when perfume itself is this incredibly sought after kind of artistic form. Super interesting because I'd never really considered perfume as something that's important, and a lot of thought has gone into it, because now you go into any chemist and there's walls of perfumes. But it's this story. So he naturally becomes one of the top perfumers, because he can just combine the smells in his head. He can figure out what they smell like before he's created them, and therefore he can create them. But of course, it all goes downhill. He smells the pure scent of a virgin, so it's a bit problematic in that sense. And then he kills her. And from then on in, he's kind of seeking that scent of purity, and the story sort of goes from there. And it is, I don't know what I expected when I started reading it. A friend gave it to me, recommended it. He plays in a band. He's very good muso, and Kurt Cobain, this was his favorite book. So he's like, I don't know what it's about either. He gave it to me and I read it and I absolutely loved it. It was incredibly refreshing. I haven't come across a story like it beyond something like Sherlock, where he's got an incredible sense of, he knows what he's doing. And in this sense, it's smell.
Wow. Good Lord. Yeah. I mean, that would just be it would be a kind of shackle to have a sense of smell that bad. I mean, my poor old partner, Samira, she's got a bit of a heightened sense of smell, and it seemed more of a pain than a luxury a lot of the time.
Yeah.
It's kind of like smell, like hearing, you can't really turn it off. But then again, smell is just, the olfactory sense is just so pungent, literally pungent for memory and for art, and for particularly memory, but it's also so mysterious that it's so hard to put your finger on smells. It's so hard. You're like, what is that? Some very nostalgic thing. And even powerfully, like we have a little air freshener thing in the apartment, and you put little drops in one of those water steam air fresheners.
And
you can put like eucalyptus and stuff, and immediately I smell eucalyptus and I think of obviously Australia, and I think of eucalyptus gumdrops and like having those in like glass. Eucalyptus gumdrops, and it's such a pungent kind of a train of images can come straight from just that instantaneous smell. And then other times, you can have something real pungent or musky. I think something recently that I smelt and I was trying to look for it everywhere in my memory. I was like, where is this coming from?
Mm.
And I eventually found it to be dried mulberries that used to be, and I once worked at a bar which had a lot of like dried berries and stuff on the back bar, sometimes just like when bored, pretending to work or whatever, or cleaning things, you smell in the jars and the various, scents and garnishes, especially if you work in a bar that has a dehydrator and you spend your time dehydrating oranges and limes and stuff. Dehydrated fruit has such a
wonderful smell.
Yes, and they all kind of evolve different characters. It's amazing. But yeah, Perfume sounds like a marvelous book. Do you have any quotes from it?
No quotes. I prepared no quotes. My apologies, but it's
probably a smart man.
Incredibly dark story. It's very visceral, very raw, very original. Like I said, I don't think I've come across another book quite like it in terms of storyline. I think there's a Netflix show about it, but I think it's done quite badly in that it's got nothing to do with the original storyline, but it takes the idea of someone with a heightened sense of smell.
Right. No, and Perfume's so interesting as well. I mean, I'd be more interested in it from that point of view now as well. I once went to a French perfumery and kind of saw how one was made and things like that. It's very interesting. And I do like perfume. I'm not much of a cologne fan. I actually prefer, if I'm going to wear something, I would wear perfume. I would take like a girlfriend's perfume and put it on but no, I definitely don't like a sweet perfume, like a too sickly sweet. No, definitely more of a fresher, softer scent is more my pleasure. But I mean, there's so much variety, and the only problem is just the advertising behind it and the whole world around it. It's always like intensity, Calvin Klein.
Yeah. But that's the thing. It opened my eyes to perfume. Like I had never considered the fact that it was like such a particular art form back in the day. And they talk about it a bit in the book, but there's the initial smell from the first spray. There's how it's reacted to your skin 5 minutes after, and then how it's lasted. I think it's 6 hours later or something. And they're all like major contributing factors as to what made a perfume successful back in the day. And so I'm assuming that that's based on actual historical wants.
I mean, also back in the day, people stunk like shit. So that they needed perfume.
Yeah.
And now people can bathe regularly, and most people have access to regular showers and things like that. Yeah, I mean, I don't really have much. I'm not sure where I heard this, and my evolutionary biology might be off, but I heard something about that we actually used to have a much greater sense of smell, but when we domesticated dogs kind of took over a lot of our use cases for needing to smell, and so our noses gradually gave up a lot of their potency, and so that's why memory, and it's such an anachronistic sense. It's so aloof and mysterious because it was something we used to have, but now can only just grasp, the edge of, because dogs are so much better at it.
Yeah,
they can smell cancer and shit, and the bastards are also narcs. So
correct. Yeah.
Righto. Well, I mean, speaking of dark novels, my second is a very dark novel in a way. It is Under the Volcano by Malcolm Lowry, 1947. Have you read this one?
No, but I think you've spoken about it before to me when you were reading it.
Oh, no, probably I don't know. I think I must have read it a long time before meeting you, but
you must have just been speaking about it then.
Probably just speaking about it because, I do speak about it a lot. Or at least about Lowry, depending. I don't know. It's one of those books, I think, which people get a bit who are, people like it or they don't. A lot of people think it's too dense, think Lowry's too dense. And it is, in a lot of ways, a very difficult book. And certainly the first chapter is difficult. I would never dream of putting the opening of Under the Volcano into our Great Openings podcast because the first chapter of Under the Volcano is basically like slapping an innocent bystander in the face, and the innocent bystander is the reader. You just walk into a slap and you have no idea what happened.
Nice.
You're like, what is going on? Why am I being slapped? What the hell is happening? So you should actually read, and I've heard other people recommend this, you should read the first chapter last. Start with the second chapter. And
kind of like the first chapter is
possibly like our podcast. We could call this On the Same Page, Under the Volcano. But the first chapter is a weird kind of mess, and it's a bit of a time warp. Basically, the novel Under the Volcano by British Canadian writer Malcom Lowry takes the place over 12 hours on the Day of the Dead in a Mexican town with a extremely alcoholic former British consul in Mexico, and it's his last 12 hours. And it's his kind of like estranged wife and his kind of half brother who's his estranged wife has had an affair with, and they kind of come to visit him, and he's out of control. There is a famous film with Albert Finney playing Jeffrey Furman, who is the main character, where Albert Finney is just plastered for 2 hours in this film, and that's the whole thing is mezcal soaked. It is a mezcal soaked jaunt, and it's a mess, but the writing is absolutely I don't know, beyond magnificent. It's so rich. Yes, it can be very dense, especially the first chapter, but if you push past that first chapter, then you have, really one of the most underrated novels of the 20th century. It's a real masterpiece. And he wrote lots of other things, but he had a very tragic life. And unfortunately, I identify a lot with him. Not particularly for his tragicness, and I'm not an alcoholic, but he was, quite middle class and privileged from Liverpool originally, went to Cambridge. But when he was about 17, before he went to Cambridge, he decided that he wanted to get on a boat and go see the Far East. And so he got onto a ship and was basically a galley hand. And there's like a famous newspaper clipping from the time being like, young, like son of, merchant Malcolm Lowry is setting off on, it's a bit patronizing, being like, look at this middle class boy doing this working class thing.
Yeah.
And but at the time he's like, I want to see the world. I want to have adventures. I want to have things to write about. I'm going to be a writer. He knew what he was going to do.
Yeah.
And he just wanted to go out and see it. And then he wrote his kind of first book based off that, called Ultramarine. And then he kind of wrote another one called Lunar Caustic, which is his New York. He went to New York. He ended up living in a shack in Canada for his last 15 years, where he basically just, because he couldn't take living in cities. If he lived in cities, he was just going to bars. He was getting fucked up. He was an absolute force of nature on the piss.
Yeah.
And getting in lots of fights and all sorts of getting up to all crazy kind of things. And so Jeffrey Furman in Under the Volcano is kind of this character, this doomed character. It's this, he's sinking in mezcal. He's sinking under the volcano throughout this book. And it's an absolute kind of crazy experimental classic. And, real, unlike lots of other modernist and great modernist books, modernist masterpieces, it's kind of an anti-metropolitan book as well. He really couldn't handle cities. He needed to get out of them. And this is, set in a small Mexican town in the shadow of a volcano, and or two volcanoes. And eventually, Lowry died of basically suicide and drink, and a very sad life. But to me, it was really big. It wasn't one of these texts that I was usually so attracted to about, the particular emotional turmoil of modern life, or a character not being able to deal with love or all these kind of things, even though that's involved. But it's really just this doomed character, and this guy this author who kind of feels doomed and always kind of had a sense of his own doom, and just drinking through it. And his kind of imagination was kind of fueled by alcohol in this crazy way, which is not excusing him, but I've got a short quote here. Turning, I see us in 100 places with 100 smiles. I come into a street and you are there. I creep at night to bed and you are waiting for me. What is there in life besides the person whom one adores and the life one can build with that person? For the first time, I understand the meaning of suicide. God, how pointless and empty the world is. Days filled with cheap and tarnished moments succeed each other. Restless and haunted nights follow in bitter routine. The sun shines without brightness and the moon rises without light. My heart has the taste of ashes and my throat is tight and weary with weeping. What is a lost soul? It is one that has turned from its true path and is groping in the darkness of remembered ways. And yeah, I mean, that's kind of how he goes along. And the kind of, he's more or less just stumbling around the streets of this Mexican town, hitting the ground face first, getting up, finding alcohol from somewhere else, pulling bottles of tequila out of garden beds that he's hidden. I don't know, like he's drinking all sorts of things. He's a mess. And the book is just an absolute kind of roller coaster of one drunk. Imagine if you had your drunkest night where you're like, holy fuck, I'm pissed. I don't even know what's going on. And then someone encapsulated that into a great novel.
Yeah. It's funny because I before you mentioned Lowry, I'd never heard of him.
Yeah.
So not that I'm well versed on every book ever published, but I'm not. Yeah, he mustn't be that well known.
No, and I think it's partly because at least though he was British and went to Cambridge, he was kind of claimed by Canada for a long time. And kind of thought of as, you know, and Volcano takes place in Mexico, kind of thought of as an American writer. And even though he ended up going back to England and dying there. But yeah, but mainly I think it's just because he's thought of as too dense, too difficult, too strange. And he is in a lot of ways, but I think if you come at him at the right time, with the right vibe, you know, with the right sympathy, maybe, and, you know, not damn him for his behavior too much, but try and see what kind of darkness he'd accepted in order to be able to write about it. And that's more or less what his whole thing was. He was able to take so much doom in his life just to try and write a line, to try and get the line right. It was real kind of, I think it mainly, he's a writer's writer, perhaps, is what the thing is.
Yep.
And he's also, he's a tragic figure as well, really tragic. Not only his own life, he was also, when he was at Cambridge, I might not get the facts straight, but a very dear friend of his confessed their love for him and he denied them and they killed themselves. And that kind of guilt racked him forever, more or less. And yeah, so he's a very complicated man. And I mean, even at the very end, I think there was some domestic violence and other things. So, you know, he's not someone to be idolized, but he's someone to be seen like someone who really, despite the darkness of their life, tried to create bright flashes. Yeah. And and so I guess I appreciate Under the Volcano for that. That someone in his condition was able to produce that and force themselves to write. Yeah, amazing to me.
Yeah, we've all got hope.
Yeah, if Lowry can do it, then anyone can. Because the dude was a fucking mess. Yeah, serious.
I love that.
Drinking.
Stashing tequila bottles in garden beds just to rip them out.
Oh yeah, there's some stories in a biography I read of a really good biography of Lowry, of the kind of the shakes that he would have and the manner he would have of getting booze into his mouth, like MacGyver style contraptions in order to get booze in his mouth early in the morning and things like that.
Yeah.
God damn. Poor old Malcolm Lowry. He's under the volcano now, probably. He wrote from hell. That's his whole thing. Day of the Dead. You like that kind of stuff, you'll probably like Under the Volcano. But start with chapter 2.
Chapter 2, skip 1.
Skip 1, read it at the end.
Nice. All right. Well, for my next pick, I had The Song of Achilles.
Oh.
Have you ever heard of it?
This is by, what's her name?
You can guess.
Madeline? No. What's
her
name? Am I right? Sorry, that okay. I can't
Madeline
remember. I
Miller.
haven't read it. Madeline Miller. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So written in 2011. She studied, I believe it was Greek literature, and she's got a degree in history. The book is set during the Greek heroic age. It's an adaptation of Homer's Iliad, but told from the perspective of Patroclus. And basically, it just follows the relationship between Patroclus and Achilles from their initial meeting as children to up until the Trojan War, where, of course, they both die. Spoilers.
Spoiler alert.
But if you didn't know that, that's your own fault. But it deals with the fact that they were romantically involved.
You had 3,000 years.
Literally, though.
You had a lot of time to read that.
But yeah, so it deals with them, and it's about them growing up together, and then they develop a romantic relationship, and basically how that relationship binds them together and leads them.
I thought
to
they were cousins. Are they not cousins?
I think in the Troy the movie, they're cousins.
No, that's where I'm getting that from, right? Yeah, I remember Eric Bana slitting Patroclus' throat.
Yeah, I'm not sure if they're cousins in real life. In this, it is a retelling. Yeah, I'm not too sure IRL, on the actual.
I mean, they're made up characters.
Historical facts. Yeah, so yeah, they might have been cousins, but that probably wouldn't have stopped them anyway because they were Greek, and
yeah,
it was very common.
Keep it in the family.
Yeah, to sleep with everyone. But it's fantastic. It's so refreshing. It's beautifully written, very poetic. It's her first book. She's only written 2 up until now. I think her last one came out in 2018. But I loved it because the Iliad was orally comprised, and so the story would have changed hundreds of times depending who you were telling it to anyways. So a sort of more modern take on it with them being gay lovers is keeping in line with just the story changes with the audience. And it's fantastic. She nails it. It's very beautiful. I couldn't recommend it more, and I hope it remains a classic for years and years to come.
Oh, it's definitely. I haven't read the book myself, but I've heard a lot about it because, I mean, I'm just generally interested in especially classical retellings, and I mean, we've talked about this before in terms of, I think I've read 3, not retellings precisely, but books for which Homer was the spark, particularly the Odyssey, but I haven't read really the Iliad back to front or any of the books which, sprung out of that. But I've always been fascinated by, the attention to that in great literature. I mean, W.H. Auden, The Shield of Achilles is one of my favorite poems of all time. It's about Hephaestus, crafting Achilles' shield and kind of telling all the stories of glory, and Achilles' whole fateful arc is printed on the shield and marvelous stuff like that. And so I've had Madeline Miller on my list, and so I think you've just given me, I don't know whether to go Perfume or to go Madeline Miller first, but
Perfume's shorter.
I've got Perfume as literally, so I might have to start with that. But marvelous choice. And yeah, I mean, I think I love when people can take and do what you want with a great text and just take bits of it. Derek Walcott's Omeros takes Achilles, his version of Achilles, and puts him in the Caribbean as a fisherman, and it's marvelous.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, yeah, her second book is also a historical fiction. I think it's called Circe. I haven't read that one.
Yes.
Have you seen it? Yeah.
Well, that's obviously from the Odyssey, but yeah, I know, and I haven't. I mean, I've seen it in bookstores, but I haven't read it.
So that's her second book. I haven't read that one, but I'll be keen to tuck into that one when I next see it available.
Good stuff.
Yeah, she's really good. She's really talented. I think she took quite a while to write it, from what I read. I think it took 5 to 8 years to write. So yeah, love to see that.
Oh, good on her. I mean, I hope the book I'm writing doesn't take that long, but sometimes it feels that way. Holy shit.
Yeah.
But anyway, Madeline Miller. All right, good. I'm going to start diversifying my list in terms of century, because I've had two 20ths. And so I'm going to go for a 19th century for my number 3.
Nice.
Which is an 1879 The Brothers Karamazov by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Damn.
And Dostoevsky's last novel. He died a few months after publication, basically. And it is, for me, you know, it's kind of, I mean, just Dostoevsky himself is just such an influence on everything. I mean, on Nietzsche, on Camus, on Baldwin, on everyone, you know, and especially, you know, the real philosophical novels, which most of them are. But for me, The Brothers Karamazov is just the absolute crystal atop the pyramid.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, we'll probably get into this when it comes to the Great Russians. I take sides, and team Dostoevsky. And perhaps that says a lot more about me than it does about them. And you know, I love a lot of Russian writers, Akhmatova and Nabokov and Brodsky, but yeah, Dostoevsky is just this, and Pushkin, but Dostoevsky is just this absolute master of the philosophical novel, which is a real genre I enjoy as a kind of great shortcut into philosophy in a way. And taking a lot of the density of the 19th century philosophy kind of just randomly introduced with, you know, Hegel and whatever. But it's, you know, it's a great exploration of the interior. You know, Dostoevsky is a kind of real, it's kind of like if Montaigne ever left his tower and went traveling, is kind of across Russia. You know, Marco Polo, he's the Magellan of the subjective seas. He's, you know, the Columbus of consciousness. And it tells a story basically of an older father and his relationship with his 3 sons.
Yep.
Ivan, Alexei, who's the kind of hero, aka Alyosha, and another one, I can't even remember the other ones now, but you know, it largely kind of corresponds to Alyosha being this faithful, good-hearted, wonderfully charismatic, beautiful young, you know, 20-year-old heroic character, and Ivan, he's slightly more older, atheistic, a bit more dour and you know, not sullen, but skeptical and cynical perspectives. And they, you know, lots of discussions. There's even like a novel inside the novel. And it's a great big thing, but it's, you know, it's a great novel about all sorts of things, but, you know, mainly, and you know, my, I think, kind of favorite theme, I think it's mainly the theme of all art, is love or its absence. And it's really the great philosophical novel of that concept. At one point, I think he says, this is, you know, a quote which I picked out: "What is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love." So, you know, he's not fucking around. He's saying some shit. "The awful thing is that beauty is mysterious as well as terrible. God and the devil are fighting there, and the battlefield is the heart of man." And some of these things seem so, you know, the idea that we're made of light and darkness, and then everything of substance casts a shadow, and that there's good and bad in everyone, you know, seems like almost a cliche these days. But Dostoevsky, you know, he kind of really inserted it, shoved it into the Western canon.
Yep.
And, you know, unfortunately, it shook so many people out of their fucking trees, like Nietzsche, and then people who misinterpreted Nietzsche afterwards, that, yeah, it kind of led to all the turmoil of the 20th century. I mean, not that Dostoevsky did, but the whole historical, you know, losing religion, losing this order of the universe when people started to get a bit too intelligent, or a bit too, you know, whatever. But, you know, so it's a great book for that. And, you know, it's an old Dostoevsky. It's the end of his life, and he's thought about a lot of things.
Yep.
And yeah, he's really coming to it. And there's one last quote, which I don't know, I always think it's a good one. And I think I have this as a little post-it at one point. Above all, avoid lies, all lies, especially the lie to yourself. Keep watch on your own lie and examine it every hour, every minute, and avoid contempt both of others and of yourself. What seems bad to you and yourself is purified by the very fact that you have noticed it in yourself. And avoid fear, though fear is simply the consequence of every lie. Never be frightened at your own faint-heartedness in attaining love. And meanwhile, do not even be very frightened by your own bad acts. That kind of stuff goes on. Yeah, great book. And yeah, my third pick of classics worth the read. Definitely read Brothers Karamazov. I think if you can, I mean, everyone knows Crime and Punishment, but you kind of know Crime and Punishment, so people should read Brothers Karamazov.
Well, I mean, as you were talking about that, it made me realize one thing, that both the classics that I've picked that are not worth it are Russian. Just by chance, and one of them is Crime and Punishment. So wonderful segue. Well. So here we are.
Well.
Yeah.
Hit me with it.
I just didn't like it. I just
more punishing than crime, was it?
I just didn't enjoy it. I don't know if I was reading it at the wrong time in my life to understand it properly, but everyone, like as you were saying, he's an incredible writer, very influential throughout everything that came after him. But I just did not like the story.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I didn't care for the character Raskolnikov. I didn't really see. I could see the crime. He murdered someone, but I don't think I got it in the way that I was meant to get it. I didn't actually think it was that dark of a story. It just all seemed a bit boring, and I don't think it's worth it.
Right. Well, you know what? I think, like I said, Crime and Punishment's not my favorite Dostoevsky or anything. Notes from the Underground and Brothers Karamazov are really what I thought to be the books which I really connected with him over. But I did like Crime and Punishment, and I mean, I didn't like Raskolnikov particularly, but I think maybe it's a timing thing. I think I can't remember exactly when I read it, but I think I was in my undergraduate and I was, thinking a lot about justice. I think, I was taking a class where we read Hannah Arendt's trial in Jerusalem about Adolf Eichmann, and, thinking about all kinds of moral concerns of justice and of acts and of guilt and ethics. And I think it interested me. I didn't exactly like Raskolnikov, but this guy just comes in and kills a lady with an axe for some money that he doesn't even end up using. He kind of just hides it under a rock, and all of the things which go through his mind and his heart, because I think I found it very interesting. He had such an insight to how guilt racks someone, how it affects someone, how it makes them aggressive, how it and how trauma and the trauma of things happening to you, of things you're seeing, and the trauma that you inflict yourself, there is kind of you wear it like tattoos, and you can't really move it. There's a great scene where, not a great scene, but where I think a woman is trampled, or in Crime and Punishment as well, which is really visceral and messes with him. And I guess, I liked it for that real inner turmoil. But I guess it was, right time where I was really involved in that kind of intellectual understanding of justice and Crime and Punishment. But it's not a book which I think you just pick up and you're like, ooh, a bit of Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see why it's particular, whereas it's about something very particular, which he's managed to write a great book about. Where Brothers Karamazov is about all of life. He a really great classic kind of gets everything.
Yeah. And I've heard that's much better as well.
Yeah. But Crime and Punishment is a very particular thing, and it's interesting for what it is. But it's not like, if someone was like, "Oh, it's my favorite book," I'd want to ask some questions. I'd be like, "Sir, we're taking you in for questioning because it sounds like you killed someone with an axe." All right. Oh, so then, well, I mean, I think your final one,
Yes.
which I think would, and my fourth pick and my first of classics that we don't deem to be in our humble opinions that great, is Tolstoy's Anna Karenina.
Correct.
Pause for universal criticism, I assume, of our opinions. I think a lot of people love Anna Karenina. I think it opens with a bang. It's got a great opening line.
True.
And
It could have
more or less
featured
goes downhill from there.
on our last episode.
Yeah. Could have definitely featured on our great openings episode, depending on the translation. I don't know, I'm paraphrasing, but all happy families are alike. Every unhappy family is, unique in their own way.
Yep.
Great opening line, and certainly establishes the various characters and families inside Tolstoy's, one of his great works. But at least for me, I think it went downhill. There's real flashes of brilliance and flashes of great writing. But I think a lot of the time he's really taking liberties. He's really jabbering on about crops and stuff. Like Levin's Levin is at once the character I enjoyed the most, the character which displayed change and was able to change. And that's, what literature is about showing change and the potential for it. But at the same time, he kind of spoils this great character by leading him down with such tedium for so much of the book. Yeah. When you come to him, you're like, oh God, more Levin, even though he's the real character.
Yeah.
None of the other characters really change. Everyone else is more or less the same. And yet the one character I was really interested in doesn't really get much of it. And yeah, I mean, I guess, I don't know. Spoiler alert, I think most people know what happens in Anna Karenina. But in my opinion, for a great classic, it should hit you like a train and you should feel it.
Hit you like a train.
Exactly. It's not the reader who gets hit by the train, Anna Karenina. It's someone else, someone eponymous. And I don't know. It didn't catch me. Could be the wrong time. Could be anything else. I thought it was obviously well written. The amount of characters are amazing. I particularly liked, certain scenes when Vronsky and Anna go to Italy, and there's the scenes where they're looking at paintings and things like that, and Vronsky's trying to paint. Those are very interesting from a character study perspective. I like those. But then a lot of the time, it just seemed to be laboring a bit.
Who is your favorite character?
I'd say ultimately Levin, just because he does change somewhat, and he seems to be the only character capable of. And that's not true. I was going to say the only character capable of sacrifice, but I mean, Anna sacrifices her child basically for romance. Not literally, but
and sacrifices
her relationship. And ultimately, yeah. So, and and I think Anna's interesting, but I think. And I don't know, but a lot of people who seem to fawn over Anna Karenina fawn over Anna. And I did not fall in love with Anna. And everyone else in the book falls in love with Anna when they meet her. And I was like, yeah, she seems chill. But I also feel like I've met quite a lot of Anna Kareninas in my life. I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know.
Who was your favorite character? Or what was your kind of general feeling?
My favorite character was Anna's first husband. What was his name? Yeah. Alexandrovich, who then she cheats on with Alexandrovich, the other dude.
Actually, yeah, I love that guy too.
I really enjoyed him. I really loved the scene when Anna's cheating on Alexandrovich with Alexandrovich, and he falls off his horse in the horse race, and she calls out Alexandrovich, and then her husband turns up and puts out his hand. He's like, I'm here to try avoid her the embarrassment of her affair. And I mean, obviously he's trying to save his own skin as well, because it looks a bit sus if she's having an open affair and he's just copping it. But I really love that scene of him. But I think the thing I hated about the story is that it's called Anna Karenina, and then it's got a tagline under it saying, vengeance is mine, I will repay. which I believe it's in every edition. And I think it sets a precedent of what the story should be about. But as far as I'm aware, there's barely any vengeance in it that you need to repay. Like Anna cheats on her husband and leaves him. She's got nothing to be vengeful about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It just wasn't the way I wanted it. I get that she's sort of angry at the end that society's against her and everything, and she repays that by killing herself. But I thought it was going in a different way, and I think that's why I don't like it.
Right.
Plus, it also took, I mean, the 30 pages where she goes insane and kills herself, I thought was fantastic, but I didn't need 800 pages to get there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. It certainly seemed like a, he takes the reader for a bit of a
long walk
detour.
for a short drink of water.
Lovely. Well put. And I think, Alexandrovich is it the husband he's a real noble character. Again, like Levin, he does change a bit, and you can obviously hold him accountable for keeping their son away from Anna and things like that, which is obviously destroying for her. But, at the end when she's sick and, he's in Vronsky's there and, and he's kind of he has the courage to kind of love her despite her not loving him and has to be humble and show Vronsky kindness as well. I thought that was a noble character who maybe even deserved better attention or more close attention to his inner journey.
Yep.
But because so much of it focused on Vronsky, and even the very last section after Anna's death focuses on how Vronsky's taking it and how Vronsky's mother is taking it or whatever else. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, just wasn't that interested in so many of them, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Wasn't interested in most of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But I don't know if that's completely turned me off Tolstoy for a while. I haven't attempted War and Peace, although people tell me it's very worth it.
I hear good things, but
I might have to give it a go.
People say Anna Karenina is one of the best novels ever written. So
absolute shambles. I don't know who is saying that, but they're
fools.
I don't know. And they clearly haven't read Moby Dick. I mean, they clearly haven't read like most novels, but whatever. That's just our opinion. We don't like Anna K.
Are you on the same page or not? Let us know. So do you have a book you're reading now?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm reading a couple now. Actually, the one I'm reading, which is very good and very contemporary because it was just published, is Burning Man, which is a biography by Frances Wilson of D.H. Lawrence.
Mm-hmm.
She's been doing lots of tours. She's been doing lots of podcasts. So, you can look it up and she speaks very eloquently about it. She's a great Lawrence scholar, and she's really done, the biography of Lawrence, which lovers, Laurentians have been kind of, I think, wanting. Lots of biographies of Lawrence out there, a very incredible, interesting, nuanced figure, and a great writer. And she really finds a strong argument to drive home about Lawrence. Lawrence really is this phoenix, this burning man rising from the ashes, this man split between, masculinity and femininity, between, his mining, hard body, kind of talismanic father who he was raised kind of resenting, and his kind of soft mother. And then, at some point after you have Women in Love and after Sons and Lovers, and, these books and The Rainbow, where Lawrence is, universally almost agreed among scholarships to be one of the great male writers of women, and to be, previously a great feminist hero of and hero of sex liberation and all these kind of things. Particularly in the 60s with free love, everyone, in 1960, Lady Chatterley's Lover, the trial took place because it had been banned. And so Lawrence kind of had this phoenix rise again after he died in 1930, I think, or 33. Phoenix rise again to prominence. And then in the 70s, an American PhD student basically wrote an essay where she took Lawrence down for being kind of phallocentric. And it was probably the most successful PhD thesis of all time, where kind of this new wave of feminist thinking came in, and Lawrence just got torn apart for his... I mean, Lawrence is entirely various. You cannot touch him. He's like a fish. The harder you grab him, he slips away. You can't really categorize him, which obviously annoys academics because he's so various. He's so interesting. You can never get one Lawrence. There's always shades of Lawrence. There's always contradiction. There's always hypocrisy. There's always insane light and dark shadow. And now he's experiencing another great rejuvenation, another great rise. And so she's kind of, Frances Wilson is really capitalizing on that and showing why, you really can't keep this Phoenix down. And Phoenix was his own symbol. This is a man who created a symbol for himself. He saw himself as a Phoenix. He knew he was there. He felt himself rising out of the ashes.
Yeah.
And he was just, this insane figure. And, he's got a strong place in Australian literature with Kangaroo, which obviously a lot of people lambast as being probably one of his worst works. But as an Australian reading Kangaroo, he managed to kind of encapsulate all the cringiness of the Australian psyche, or the Anglo-Australian psyche, within 2 months of arriving on the continent. So he was an absolute genius, and also very complicated and controversial guy. And it's a great biography. Really good. Loving it. I'm probably halfway through, and she's an exceptional writer. And again, she's done so much work. Loving it. Burning Man. How about you?
I recently bought a collection of short stories called Grand Union by Zadie Smith.
Zadie.
Yeah.
I haven't read Grand. How are the stories?
They're good.
Maybe I have read it. Is that the story? There's one in the park in Rome where she goes to Park Borghese.
I haven't read that one.
Okay, maybe that's a different collection. All right. Sorry, go on.
I've never read any Zadie Smith, so I had no idea of what I was walking into, but she is pretty good. I like her a lot. She's very, very funny. I like her humor a lot. Very, very contemporary. I didn't realize quite how contemporary. I was reading one of the stories and she kept mentioning this Brett character, and she clearly hated this Brett character. Was it Brett? Yeah, Brett. And then it ended up being Brett Kavanaugh, the dude in America. And I sort of picked it up in the last line. I was like, oh shit, that's who we're talking about. And I was like, that was only last year, but then I Googled it and it was actually 3 years ago or something. And then I was like,
that was a crazy time. The whole Brett Kavanaugh hearing was insane.
Yeah.
I mean, it was almost too much for me. I couldn't really take it at the time. It was just too much, but that's amazing. I mean, I haven't read those stories. I love Zadie Smith. I've read White Teeth, her first, and Swing Time, probably her most recent novel. I also read her great collection of essays, which came out during the pandemic, called Intimations, I think it's called. And I've got a great collection of her essays called Feel Free as well. And I love her. And also her husband, Nick Laird, is a great writer. And there's, I mean, she's marvelous. I think maybe some short stories from Zadie Smith is maybe what the doctor's ordering. Which is do you have a favorite story so far? How many have you read?
I've only read 3.
How many are in there? Is there a lot, or is it kind of just more longer stories?
We're looking at probably 15.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah.
So quite a few. But my favorite's been Downtown So Far. That was the one referencing Brett Kavanaugh. Yeah, I'm loving him, but it makes me want to read her novels because I think often you get a better sense of who she is as a writer and therefore can enjoy the short stories better if you've actually read her as a full-length author. So yeah, they're good little tasters. It's a great way to get into her, I guess. And then
Yeah.
I'll read more eventually. She's
Certainly.
on the list.
I think, I mean, I loved White Teeth. I didn't like Swing Time that much. One of her more recent novels. I didn't like it it was fine, but it just didn't exactly catch me too much. I thought White Teeth her debut was marvelous. And for someone to kind of write that basically when she was at Cambridge, I think she wrote most of that. And then just come out with it. Yeah, really good book. And On Beauty is equally good. Either of those are good places to start with Zadie Smith for sure.
Nice.
And I believe we're on the same page now.
We're on the same page. So like and subscribe, and yeah.
Like and subscribe if anyone's listening. Goodbye.
Follow us on Instagram. If you're listening, see ya.
Yeah. Well, look forward to our next podcast, and we will keep you with bated breath on a topic because we haven't decided, I don't think.
No, we haven't. No.
Those were some classics worth reading, and definitely one at least, which isn't. Yeah. See you guys.
See ya. Peace.